In the middle of the section of the Yomim Tovim, in this week's Parsha, the Torah says of Kutzrechem es k'tzir artzachem, when you are harvesting your land, you shouldn't cut off the edge of the field, you need to leave the payah. V'leket k'tzirchem, any stalks that fall down while you're harvesting, you need to leave to the poor people. And the question becomes, why is the Torah telling it to us smack right over here, smack in the middle of the Yomim Tovim? So we have a number of Mefarshim that give us different explanations. The Even Ezra says, since now after Shavuos, where the Torah says it, this is the time when, this is the beginning of the season of the harvest of the wheat, so the Torah is telling us, don't forget to do these mitzvahs, which in truth were commanded to us already once previously in Parshas Kedoshim, but now is the time, so it's being told to us again. The Ramban says that earlier on in this whole section, it was speaking about when you come into Eretz Yisrael, there's the mitzvah of the Omer, which is of course the mitzvah brought from the barley on the second day of Shavuos. So we are being told over here that regarding that mitzvah, don't think that you can take the omer from the edge of the field, from the payah or from the leket that fell down. You need to leave those things for the poor people. Other Mefarshim say something similar to that as well. You shouldn't think that once you took the omer, now that field will not need the mitzvahs of payah and leket. So we need to know that this field is still obligated in those mitzvahs as well, that you need to give them to the poor people. Rashi comes along and says, Amar Rabbi Avardimas, Rabbi Yosi, why did the Torah put these mitzvahs right over here in the middle of the Yomim Tovim? Pesach and Shavuos on the one side, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot from the other side. It's to teach you that if you give leket, shikha, and pay it to the poor person, it's considered as if he built the Beis HaMikdash and brought the karbanis inside. The question that Rebbe has is, why does Rashi need to have this drasha and not explain it simply like one of these other Mefarshim, that it's for a very practical reason why the Torah is telling it to us over here? Now, the fact that Rashi is not explaining that it's somehow to do with the mitzvah of Omer, as some of the Mefarshim just said, the Rebbe says this could possibly be because if that's the case, it should have said it right by the dinim of Omer and not leave it all the way till after Shavuos. But the explanation of the Even Ezra that said that since this is the time of the harvesting of the wheat, this is why the Torah is reminding us of these mitzvahs again, seemingly that seems a very simple explanation in Pshutei Shel Mikra. Why doesn't Rashi use this? Some other questions in Rashi. The beginning of this Rashi actually says something else. That the reason the Torah is repeating this mitzvah, I said before, it's said already in the earlier parsha, that's in order to be over on Shnei Lavin, on an extra Aveira, if you don't leave it for the poor people. Then Rashi goes on, quoting this idea of why is it said in between the Yomim Tovim, to be counted as if you built a Beis HaMikdash and you brought the karbanis. The question is, what is the connection between these 2 points in Rashi? Usually this would be put into 2 different Dibra Maskils, 2 different Rashis. There's one aspect that Rashi is explaining why it's generally repeated a second time. Another aspect is, if the Torah is telling it to us, why is it being said in the middle of the Yomim Tovim? Some other questions that Rebbe has are, why is it important to say Amar Rabbi Avardimas? We know that this is usually coming to help understand something when Rashi gives us the name. Also, why does Rashi have to say Pesach and Shavuos from one side, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur on the other side? Why can't he just say it's in the middle of the Yomim Tovim? Why does he have to specify all of these particular Yomim Tovim? Also, the pasuk only speaks about leket and payah. Why is Rashi adding shikha, which is not even mentioned in this pasuk? Now the Rebbe turns to some differences between the way Rashi quotes this Toras Kohanim and the way it actually appears in our Toras Kohanim. So the Rebbe says, number 1, in Toras Kohanim it says Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Rashi adds Chag, which is Sukkos. In Toras Kohanim it says Leket, Shikcha, Peya, and Meiser Oni. Rashi doesn't say Meiser Oni. He mentions Shikcha, as we said, but he doesn't say Meiser Oni. In the Toras Kohanim it says, it's as if the Beis HaMikdash exists and you brought all the karbonos. Rashi says it's as if you built the Beis HaMikdash and brought the karbonos. Now the Rebbe moves on to the next Rashi, where the Rashi says the word ta'azoiv. What does ta'azoiv mean? You need to leave it for the poor people. Rashi says, leave it in front of them, they'll collect it. You shouldn't even help any of these poor people. The question is, this same mitzvah, as we said before, says already in Parshas Kedoshim, it said over there already the word ta'azoiv. So why does Rashi not explain this ta'azoiv over there, rather leaves it for this parsha? The Rebbe says the explanation goes as follows. The fact that the Torah is telling us about these mitzvahs right between the Yomim Tovim is not really a question. We were speaking about some things related to the harvest of the grain. As we said, there's the Omer, there's the flour offering that comes on Shavuos. So the Torah is telling us, make sure you realize you're not finished with all the dinim of the field yet. Don't think now you can now just take all the rest of it for yourself. There are other dinim that need to be done. There's the payah and the leket, etc. The question is, why is the Torah repeating it generally? We learned these mitzvahs already of Peah and Leket. And this is why Rashi tells us it's in order to be over a second Aveira. It's specifically based on, once we know that it's only here to give us another Aveira, now the question becomes, why is it appearing here in the middle of the Yom Tovim? That is, if it was the first time the Torah is telling it to us, we understand. We mentioned some things about the harvest and to do with the Yom Tovim. The Torah wants to make sure that we don't make that mistake thinking that we're done. But since we know these dinim already, so the Torah doesn't have to tell it to us for that reason. That now becomes the question. So why, if the Torah wants to repeat it, does it have to be said specifically here? This isn't a parsha that's mainly discussing harvest. It's mainly a parsha that's discussing Yom Tovim and the karbonos of the Yom Tovim. And that's why Rashi emphasizes Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Mikan. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we know that's not even times that are related to harvest. So it's clearly a parsha that's not primarily about harvest. So why is the Torah, if it wants to repeat it, but why here specifically? And that's why Rashi says that it's to teach you that if you do these mitzvahs, it's as if you built a Beis HaMikdash and brought the karbonos. To explain, what's the connection between these gifts to the poor and karbonos? Is that in both cases you're taking your hard-earned money, your living, and you're giving it away according to the tzivui of Hashem, either to the Beis HaMikdash or to the poor people, etc. Now, what about regular tzedakah? Why is it in these gifts more than regular tzedakah? Because in regular tzedakah, it's also possible that it's money that you didn't even work so hard for it. You maybe earned it in an easy way, maybe got it as an inheritance, a gift, you found it, etc., etc. Whereas in grain is usually associated with a lot of work, plowing, sowing, harvesting, etc., etc. And that's why Rashi actually adds not only like karbonos, but like binyan Beis HaMikdash. It comes with a lot of effort, there's a lot of work, a lot of toil. Now the Rebbe continues. When we compare these gifts to the poor to the karbonos, or the building of the Beis HaMikdash, there's actually 2 points. One point is that you're giving away your hard-earned money to the Eibishter, to the Beis HaMikdash, to the poor, etc. Another point is that the poor person is receiving the gift. What's the practical difference? If it's only about the fact that you're giving away, it doesn't really matter so much how the poor person is receiving it. On the other hand, if the main point is the poor person, then it obviously needs to be that the giving to the poor person has to be in the most perfect way. And this is the difference between the Torah's Koyanim and Rashi. And the Torah's Koyanim was discussing more about the fact that you're giving it away. This is why the Torah's Koyanim uses the word moitzi, you give away your things. This is a diuk that I forgot to mention earlier. Rashi just says you give it to the poor person in the proper way. Rashi is emphasizing that you're giving it in the proper way. And in fact, this is why Rashi mentions leket, shikha, and peah, and not meiser ani. And the reason for this is because there's something unique, a common denominator in these three. In leket, shikha, and peah, you don't even get the choice to be able to give it to whichever poor person you want, to those that are your best friends, to the people that are closest to you, etc. Meiser ani, on the other hand, is something that technically you can give also to your close relatives, to those that are close to you, etc., etc. And this is the reason, actually, even more so why Rashi says, Kilu bana Beis HaMikdash, more than just karbonos. Karbonos, you may be bringing your own karbonos. It's again like your personal benefit you're having out of it. When we speak about the Beis HaMikdash, the effort you're putting in is something that's going to be for all Yidden equally. And this is what we're saying, that when you're giving to the poor person in these leket, shikha, and peah, it's something that you're not going to have any personal benefit, you're just giving it away to the poor. Why? And so why doesn't Rashi also mention the dinim of the vineyard, those things that need to be left from the vineyard as well? Because those are also things that need to be given away to the poor, and you also don't have personal benefit. So this is why Rashi says Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Chag from the one side. In other words, to emphasize that we're speaking about a time in the year which is way before Sukkah, so it's not even the time where we're gathering the produce of the vineyard, etc., etc., etc. Now let's look at the next Rashi. So what does Rashi go on and say? Tazoiv, leave it in front of the poor people. Don't help them. In other words, this is all emphasizing even more the idea that it has nothing to do with you, the owner. Your hands are out of it completely. You don't have the benefit even of assisting them to give it to those poor people. Now Rashi says that who says this? Rabbi Avardimos. Why does Rashi need to say this? Because an extra sharp Talmud could end up asking, it's all very nice you're giving away from your own things. You're giving it away without even having any benefit. But how much are you giving already? Why is it such a big deal? Kilu bana Beis HaMikdash. So Rashi answers this by telling us, Amar Rabbi Avardimos. The Yerushalmi tells us there was someone called Yehuda Ish Hutzi that for 3 months was spending time trying to find a source for the halacha that tells us that your own personal city comes before other people's cities. When it comes to the water that needs to be for this city or for another city, from a river, etc., etc., your life, basically the people in your city come before other people. He couldn't come up with the explanation. He comes to Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says, go to my son Rabbi Avardimas. I was saying Rabbi Avardimas. And he goes ahead and proves to him from a pasuk that always, the people of your city always come first. Now, why is Rabbi Yossi sending to his son? Why doesn't he just tell him straight out the halacha? This is clearly because Rabbi Avardimas specifically had a special koch in this idea that the people closest to you always come first, and that this is even according to Torah, you give the poor people of your city first, etc., etc. That's why it's Rabbi Avardimas specifically that emphasizes over here that when you're going to now leave it for all people equally, without having any choice who's getting it, you can't give it to the people of your city first, etc., etc. This is going completely opposite of your nature, and even what's usually expected from the Torah. That's why it's such a big chiddush, and that's why we say it as if you built the Beis HaMikdash and brought the korbanos. The Rebbe says we also have a halachic aspect over here in Rashi. According to the Rambam, these mitzvahs of leket, shikha, and pei are called a lav hanitik laseh, which means even if you were over the loisaseh and you didn't leave it for the poor, you ended up cutting the whole field, you could still fix it up because the pasuk says, so go ahead and give it to the poor person now. According to Rashi, however, we understand now, no, there's no asay over here in Ta'azoiv to fix it up. The Ta'azoiv is coming to tell us, if anything, just the opposite. It's coming to tell us that you need to remove your hands, you have nothing to do with it anymore, you don't have any benefit at all anymore in this whole thing, you need to leave it for the poor, and that you're completely uninvolved anymore in all of this. In other words, it's part of the geder of the mitzvah itself that you need to completely abandon it and leave it. And the Rebbe concludes with a hayra, number one, how important it is to do every single mitzvah without any personal benefit or ulterior motives. And number two, on the other hand, the tremendous idea, when we have this kafir, we bend our Yetzirah, we don't do the things that we're comfortable with. It's then as if we built the Beis HaMikdash, and the Rebbe says specifically through acting in this sort of way, we are zoichet to the building of the Beis HaMikdash, take it from Yad Mamash.